Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Three Principles Global Community webinar. The Three Principles Global Community, or 3PGC, is a nonprofit organization that's committed to bringing an understanding of the three principles to people throughout the world. Today, we have Erin Turner with us. Erin has had a keen interest in the nature and relevance of the three principles for over 25 years. Over the last 18 years, he's worked with individuals, families, couples, leaders, entrepreneurs, teams, and organizations in the private sector, education, charity sector, government, and the military. He's also worked with athletes, actors. His primary focus for the last 13 years has been working with businesses and organizations. Erin worked at Transcend Associates for 10 years before moving to London and founding One Thought, which is a company focused on bringing an understanding of the three principles to the mainstream. He's also the president of the 3PGC Board of Directors and on the executive committee of the 3P UK conference. So Erin, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you're taking the time to join us on this webinar. And I'm going to turn it over to you and mute myself so you can't hear the roofing being done on my house.
Great. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to talk to you guys. I see some familiar faces. Hey, Nicola and Nikki, good to see you. And it's really nice to be able to be available to you. I mean, as Bonnie was saying, I am just fascinated in the principles as a description of reality. There's so many times that they're completely counterintuitive, but every time I've gone with it, it's turned out to be an accurate description that detangles and demystifies and straightens things out. So I've just been fascinated in that, and fascinated how that understanding or lack of understanding is the key in almost every area I've been involved in or worked with or had clients in. So working on the hypothesis that it's a description of everything, I've kind of gone beyond what I would have expected, like at the beginning of this journey, or even at several points all along, I would have bet against that being the case. And one of the things that's really, so I was going to say, I had the title, I kind of saw this webinar coming up and I thought, well, what title shall I do? And one of the things that's fascinated me about the principles is just how wrong you can be about what is normal, what is neutral, and what is possible. So I thought, well, that'd be an interesting thing to talk about. So I wrote it up. And then I read it, and it looked really boring. So I changed my mind to what I would really like to talk about is the challenge of understanding the principles. Like, if the principles and our ability to understand them is such a key factor, and I'm assuming that you guys are on this webinar because you've experienced benefits that have come with more of an understanding of what we call mind, consciousness, and thought, that it would be interesting to talk about, well, as people that are interested in that, like, what is the challenges of understanding that? But I know that you may have read the original write-up and be interested in that, so maybe I'll fold that in. And I'm also more than happy to answer any questions that you have about anything. So I'm kind of at your disposal for the next hour. So don't be shy. And what I wanted to talk about is the challenge of understanding the principles. I was thinking that the initial challenge, because I work with a lot of people that are not really interested in looking at the mind or have their level of well-being, or they're not really, and I work with them because there's such a huge value to seeing the role and nature of the mind in life and in everything you do, that I've kind of been motivated to work with people that wouldn't take an interest left to their own devices, you know. Now, old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, but you can try. So that's what I've been up to. Shoving people's head in the water. If they can't breathe, they're going to drink. So I can see that the initial challenge in understanding the principles, and I find this in organizations, is that our existing assumptions about reality fly in the face about what the principles have to say about reality. And that was totally my experience. My assumption was I knew what was happening in the life that I was living, and that I was getting some sort of useful gauge about my relationships, about my future, about my circumstances, about what was a good decision and what was a bad decision. I completely trusted my mind almost all the time. And as a result, I spent a lot of time in some fairly anxious, dark places, because if my mind tanked and showed me a really painful reality, to me, that was a circumstance and I had to deal with it. And in order to deal with it, I had to figure it out. And in order to figure it out, I had to think it through. And in order to think it through, I had to kind of keep mulling over the thought that we now know caused it in the first place. So, and I was completely unaware of this, So much so that one of the times I took a dive into a very dark place was during my undergraduate exams, where I'm almost completely sure I must have been significantly clinically anxious. I must have been. I was losing hair. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sit still. I was in anxious fantasies almost all the time. But I wouldn't have said fantasies. I would have said, when you have really important exams like this, it's very stressful. And my mum was so worried about me that she got George Pransky to call me up. And unsurprisingly, for those who know what the principles are, and I'll cover that in a bit if you don't, he was trying to get me to consider that there was something about the way I was thinking that was affecting the way I was feeling. And I was absolutely adamant that he was wrong. Now, I didn't come to the conclusion that he was wrong. Without giving it any consideration, I just assumed I knew he was wrong. And that's fascinating to me, that when you put the proposition of the principles on the table, which is basically you're experiencing a fluid, creative function of thought that appears to you as a sensory reality, but is changing constantly. But because it looks so real to you, you don't notice this. And that's all coming from, or a function of, this incredible potential of mind, which means that you're dealing with an unlimited deck, and you've got kind of whatever intelligence is behind everything, you got that. So you lack nothing. So I was not living with that reality at all. I thought I was dealing with a deck in which I had my strengths, I had my weaknesses, I had my challenges, I was a certain way, and I thought I knew that about myself. But this is all thought that I'm thinking is real. And when you put that to some people, the challenge for them is it flies in the face of their assumptions. And the challenge for them is, and for me too, my assumptions do not look like assumptions to me. It wasn't like, I assume I'm directly in contact with the external reality. That wasn't what it looked like. It was like, are you crazy? I can see my life in front of me. I'm not looking at thought. Anyway, what else you got? I basically was thinking that when George tried 3 times to get me to consider that there might be a thought factor involved. And 3 times I basically was like, listen, as I told you before, these exams are very important. There's a lot riding on them. It's not thought. Can we move on to something that it might be? And in hindsight, having worked with people and having learned and having come to see, oh, that is true. It's interesting. You can actually be wrong and be completely adamant and have no basis for it. It's not like I could have told him, yeah, I've looked into this and considered all the possibilities of where people's experience might be coming from. And I've actually weighed it up and come to the conclusion that you're wrong. Wasn't that at all? It's like, I haven't thought about it at all. I've never really thought about it before. It's not something I really know about, but I'm sure you're wrong. And that's the challenge of understanding the principles, is the idea that reality is, you can't take reality on face value. is challenging. That is really, really challenging because of mind, thought, and consciousness, because whatever thought makes up and you assume is real because you feel it, you really have to take a step back and willing to consider you might be wrong. And that's a jump in understanding. Like, considering that what feels real might not be real is a jump in understanding. And when I first came across the principles, I wasn't willing to take that jump. and it was kind of a form of arrogance that was a misplaced confidence in my own perspective, which is a natural function of the way we experience thought through consciousness, through our senses, and it feels real to us. It often gives me a giggle when people come out of movies and they don't say, "Oh, I thought that movie was bad," or "I thought that movie was good." They literally argue about who's right. That was a good movie. Oh, you idiot. Anyone knows that was a bad movie. As if there's something about the movie. And that's a real challenge. Like, when we work with organizations, there are assumptions that they have about reality and about their ability to grasp reality and about the external reality and the limits it places on their ability to have new thought, to have a clear mind, to have well-being in the face of the circumstance, in the face of the past, in the face of their team members, in the face of there's only 24 hours in the day. There are so many assumptions that people have that are in direct opposition to the idea that you have an unlimited potential for an unlimited experience, and there's nothing that gets in the way of that. Is completely unconditional. Completely unconditional. The sky is not the limit because that's physical. There is absolutely no limit because there's this potential of mind that we get through thought that has no solid form. So there's literally, and that's kind of what I was going to say in my original boring talk, was if from a principles perspective, it's normal to know there's no limit. It's normal to be open to the fact that you don't know what's possible. It's normal to know that you could have any experience in any circumstance. That's all normal. That all becomes normal. Whereas the assumption before that is, well, I'm doing pretty good considering, and in this situation anyone would feel, and of course you can't do this, and of course you can't, and you're flying directly in the face of that. Now what's interesting is that's a one-time challenge, right? So when we work with organizations, there's an initial period of work that could be anything from the first 3-day training to the first year and a half, where we are knocking on the door of those expectations, those assumptions, and the general consensus within the company is these one thought people are complete idiots. And do you hear what they're saying? And then there's a point at which they say, well, what if they're right? Then you're done. You're totally done. You're absolutely done. Because as soon as somebody is willing to consider there might be something to it, instead of arguing with it, they'll start to see the truth of it, because it is true. Not the principles aren't true, but the principles point to the true principles. Like in our little heads, we all have a version of mind, consciousness, and thought. And if we all talk together, we'd all learn from each other because we all have a little bit of a different grasp of it. But what those grasps are insights into are fundamentally, ultimately true. So if you're willing to take a look, you'll start to see. There's no challenge. Initially, there's no challenge in understanding if you're willing to have an open mind and take a look and you're curious. And the challenge is getting people to be curious in the face of the fact that most adults assume they know how life works, what reality is, who they are, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. And we were working with one group a few months ago, and they were so adamant that they knew that after 2 days, I just got to the point where I was like, I don't see how to do this. Like, they are so unwilling to step away from what they assume to be true that they literally can't hear what I'm saying, And I don't know how to bridge that. And it was really funny. This points to the second thing I wanted to say, but I kind of just got really hopeless and I gave up. And they were asking questions that I basically said, well, look, I don't know what to tell you. I don't really know what to do, because you can't hear what I'm saying. You're not looking to see what I'm trying to say. I've been trying for 2 days, so I just don't think this is going to happen. and it was really interesting, because they got less interested in interpreting, understanding, and incorporating what I was trying to say. And they got more interested in what I was pointing to. And it shocks the life out of me every time. But like from 1 second to the next, like literally within 5 minutes, we had a group of 25 people that were wildly in their own worlds to a really quiet group that had gone from zero understanding to like a really appreciative understanding. Like people that were in all sorts of theories were like, God, I really see. It was absolutely amazing. And that shows you that challenge for people to be open enough to take a look, and instead of coming from what they think is real, to look towards what you're pointing to in a new way. And it's night and day. And that, in my experience, was the initial challenge. So I had plenty of exposure to the principles for a few years, and I had relatively zero benefit from that, because I thought it was all just obviously stupid, until I saw a change that I couldn't explain. And that got me curious. It's like, well, if I can't explain it, that means they know something that I don't know. And from that moment, I started understanding, because I was interested in what was observable. That's the other thing that fascinates me, is that patterns that illuminate the principles as a truth are everywhere. They fly in the face of what people think are true, but they never get noticed. So the way that we're perceptually and emotionally schizophrenic about the same thing, whether it's we live in London, and we moved from the States, so we didn't get a car, and we were thrilled that we could live somewhere without having to have a car. And recently we got a car, and I got all precious about it. And I swear to God, I saw a dent in the door. It was very subtle, but it was a definite dent. 2 days later, I can't see it. I literally, I literally can't see it. Now, that would be surprising if you didn't know that our perception shifts as our thought shifts, as our feeling shifts. It totally shifts. So that was the challenge for me. And what's nice about that is, if you're willing to take a look and consider, oh, you might be experiencing nothing but thought. Thought might be completely ephemeral, made up, and have no life of its own, but it can feel real, because of that fills up our senses, that fills up our awareness, that fills up consciousness. That's what consciousness is about, understanding why something so ephemeral or will-o'-the-wispy feels so real. And so that was a massive challenge for me. And on reflection, weirdly, the principle of mind was not a challenge at all. The idea that there was a universal intelligence behind life, I was kind of brought up with that in a way that, not that I believed it, but I'd already seen that was true. That I had already seen, and because it was something I was open to as real, I'd seen the evidence for it. So that was not new for me. So that's the first thing I wanted to point to, is that there's that initial challenge to go from a reality or an assumption about reality where there's no mind, thought, and consciousness, or at least no thought and consciousness, to a reality in which that's all there is. I mean, that's a massive jump. And you've probably experienced for yourself that it's head turning, it's enlightening, it's life changing, and it puts you in a completely different realm of understanding, where all of a sudden you're sensitive to these things, and you understand things that you never understood before. Like, I understood why all of my relationships were 3 months long and no longer, because that was long enough to get in a bad thought, hold it against the other person or the relationship, and get in such a funk about it that either you didn't want to be with them or they didn't want to be with you. And even though it was a different person and different situation every time, it made total sense. It made total sense why I loved playing music. I really enjoyed it, and it was great in rehearsal, but I couldn't play a gig because I would go from having my mind connected to the music to having my mind distracted by anxiety and self-consciousness. So of course, I was literally a different kind of mind when I was playing in public versus rehearsing. And all these things started to make sense, and life got so much easier. And as we live in a world where more and more people are kind of aware, oh, there are principles, oh, that does make sense, that is a guide to reality. My experience is there's a whole new challenge kicks in right then. Because you become aware, oh, I'm on a journey. Well, this is my experience. Oh, I'm on a journey where my level of consciousness, my ability to navigate my experience, my thought in a healthy way, my ability to have a completely new normal of clarity and well-being and resilience, and it depends on my understanding of mind, consciousness, and thought. That was hugely helpful. Oh, now I know what I'm dealing with. Now I know what I'm understanding. So I'm all set. Now, what's interesting is if I look at the last 20 odd years, I have had jumps in understanding constantly over that time, which I'm so grateful for. And I think is just an absolutely awesome aspect of life with a growth in understanding. But yeah, I've had times of like real gear crunching. I thought I could drive stick, but there's crunching gears. And then I've had times of like really bad, not bad, but like real stale plateaus. And in those times, I'm as interested and focused on understanding the principles as in the rich times. It's like, well, what's that about? Like slipping in and out of gear, slipping in and out of richness, slipping in and out of learning, slipping in and out of a real feeling of ease and kind of that feeling where you have the wind at your back, and kind of a dry business as usual type feeling. And ironically, and you might have heard me say this before, but ironically, some of the times where I felt I had the clearest understanding of the principles have been the driest. So there are times where I felt so clear about the principles that I was like, oh, no, it's not like that. It's like this. And no, it's not like that. It's like this. And I can draw you a diagram that clearly illustrates, like, I've got this, I have this down. I know. And what I've come to appreciate over time is that the principles, it's not just looking to understand the principles. There's an understanding of understanding. Like there's a certain understanding of understanding that illuminates what I think of as the next level challenge, which is how do you learn about something that you already know something about, particularly the principles. And if I use myself as an example, there are times where I've got clearer on this is going to sound so funny, but I've got clearer on what I think the principles are. In other words, I've crystallized my own conception of the principles and have not known it was my concept. And in hindsight, the only clues that it wasn't real understanding, it was a concept, is that nothing really changed for me in a rich way. Like nothing deepened in my feeling. Nothing really happened to me except I got clear intellectually and I got shallow in feeling. Those were two. And thirdly, which is the real telltale sign, I got intellectually arrogant, right? Which means because the principles are true, and because I thought I got clear on the principles, I thought I had the right understanding of the principles. But I thought, and that mistaken understanding of reality, because there was no feeling of understanding to it. Well, there was a feeling of understanding to it, but this is what I wanted to point out. There was a feeling of intellectual understanding. So in my experience, intellectual understanding has a very conceptually clear, you can put it in a box feeling, that in a way, it feels like you have your head around something. You've contained it within a clarity of thought, that you can be very specific about it. Now, what I've come to appreciate, mostly from listening to Sydney Banks and from the echoes of things that he said, are that understanding is not a content issue. So I was raised fairly intellectually, and I was raised with the idea that understanding is a content issue. It's about clarity about something. It's about specificity and clarity on understanding something. What the principles point to is that understanding is a state in which you have a feeling of understanding. And a feeling of understanding has a feeling of perspective and has a lack of reactivity. Because like, if you understand something, you don't react to it because you understand it. Like, you really understand it. Not like, I understand it, A equals B equals C, let me tell you about it. But like, you really understand it. You know, so I'll give you a really silly example. So if someone in my family is reactive to me and is rude to me, when I'm in a feeling of understanding, it makes sense to me. I don't agree with the behavior. I don't always tolerate the behavior. Like, at some point I might say, well, look, what do you think of how you talk to me? Or I don't think, but there's a feeling of, and I don't know how to describe that feeling of understanding, except there is a feeling of caring and perspective and neutrality, and it makes sense in a feelingful way, that there's no edges and disruption to it. Like, it makes sense. And there are things in my life that are like that, that when my mind shifts to like what I think of as a less encumbered or a deeper space, I have a feeling of understanding. Like I have a feeling of sense about things. And what resonated to me most to kind of explain this perspective on understanding is that idea of sense. Like, you get a sense of something, you get a feel for something, right? So it's one thing to say, mind is the universal consciousness of all things. Right? That's right. That's okay. Yeah, fine. It is, yes. But if you have a feeling of understanding, that feels not only real, but it affects you. Like, you feel the truth of that. Like, you feel like there are times that you feel your sameness to other people. You feel your goodwill for other people. And what the principles has pointed out to me, which has been useful just because of where I come from, is that understanding is a symptom of a state of consciousness. It's a less obscured consciousness. It's a less distracted consciousness. It's a less opinionated consciousness. It's a more open consciousness. So you can see things in a neutral light of understanding, rather than being hoodwinked by your own constructed understanding, right? So what's interesting to me is the more I got clear on what I thought the principles were, but I didn't realize it was I thought. It's like, I'm clear on the principles, but I didn't realize that I was in a feeling of a purely conceptual understanding. I thought I was right. I thought I knew, and I thought I could tell when other people were wrong. And I was completely unselfconsciously adamant and arrogant about that. And I thought, well, it's not really arrogance, it's just clarity. But that clarity had a conceptual arrogance to it. Like, I didn't feel what I was saying. I didn't feel it. I was not feeling the relevance and the reality of what I was saying. And as a result, my work was very flat. It was super clear, conceptually, but it lacked impact. And I was out of touch with what I was talking about. I was in touch with my concept of it. So the second challenge of understanding is we have definitions of understanding that stop us from seeing that if you don't have a sense or a feeling of understanding, like a feeling of an understanding, understanding full feeling, it's just thought, it's just clarity of thought, it's just content, it's just conception. And that's fine. It's totally fine to have that. I have that all the time. But knowing that when you feel that conceptual clarity, it's conceptual clarity. It's not, you're not in touch with your ability to understand things in a sense, get a sense of them. You're not in a state of understanding. You're not in a space of understanding. You're in a clear concept. And that's important to know, because when I didn't really understand that as well, I spent months thinking I was on the right track. And I was essentially lost in my own conceptual understanding, because I was looking at the wrong thing. I was looking for the clarity of thought, of the thought, as opposed to the feeling of understanding. And you know how I talked about in the beginning, you can get stuck in a false reality because you're convinced by what you think rather than the indications of what's actually true. There were indications of what was actually true that are embarrassingly obvious that I completely missed. So I was sitting in a group meeting, and so when I worked at Pransky and Associates, Sydney Banks used to be the faculty development consultant. And he came down from Canada, and he's sitting in a room with us, and I'm dying to hear what he's got to say, because in my mind, Sid understood the principles better than me, and so I was eager to get more understanding, right? Completely unaware that I could have had more understanding if I knew I didn't have understanding, because I was so conceptual or whatever. And so he sits down, and I'm like, sweet, I need some more. This is brilliant. So he sits down and he says, you know, the other night I just had this jump in understanding, and I suddenly saw with much more clarity the real meaning of the principles. And I started to appreciate the true power of the principles that I'd never realized before. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is what? I mean, and it was slightly confusing to me that, like, if you're saying that, how come I think I understand it better than you? You think you do. And it took me a really long time to realize that when I'm in a feeling of understanding, that understanding is so real that you really do appreciate, God, you couldn't really get your head around this. You couldn't get your head around this. You could never really understand that. But because I was in a conceptual version, and because I didn't realize that was not real understanding, I was in this altered reality where I thought I understood more than I did. And the symptom of that was like, Sydney Banks, as far as I'm concerned, is actually enlightened. I'm not. I'm more confident about my complete understanding than he is. Weird. It was only once, but he was hammering on this, like, you can't understand this intellectually. And because I was in that false understanding, because I didn't see, you have to have, like, the understanding is 3 dimensions. It's a feeling that comes from a state of a more open consciousness in which you see things more clearly. If you just see the things more clearly without the sense of it, without that feeling, you're not understanding it. That's not full understanding. It's like, in a way, the picture without the music is not the full picture. See, and I hadn't really appreciated what the music meant, and I thought that feeling of intellectual understanding, of being sure, being clear, being adamant, feeling I know, I thought that was the music of understanding. I thought, oh yes, I have the music of understanding. And now I realize that's the music of misunderstanding. That's when you're tricked by your experience into thinking you understand because you have a clear concept of something. And the principles are not a concept, cannot be contained by a concept. They're a truth that, because you are a manifestation of that truth, you have a direct feeling for it. And when you go into a feeling of understanding, you're in it, you feel it, you know it. And then you say, well, if I am it and I know it, why don't I know it more? Because we get tricked into thinking false understandings are understandings. Just like before you see there are principles, you think reality directly is real. So then you go, oh, there are principles. This is amazing. Now I'm on track. And then you think you understand it because you make a form out of it and you're like, I got it. But if you don't hear the you're in for all the much longer, right? So I really wanted to raise that because I feel like if we stick to our ability to know our feeling of understanding and we respect that and we recognize the importance of what that tells us about our consciousness, like are we in made up thought consciousness or are we in more understanding, which has less form? It really is a sense and not a structure. If we use that, this understanding will be able to be real and not conceptual, and will keep rippling out in the world in a way that it will absolutely shift the entire consciousness and understanding of the world. It can't help but do that in the way it's done that to anybody that's had that experience. But there are two pitfalls waiting for us. One is people are not willing to consider it as a description of reality, but that one's off the table, because what we find in the companies we work in is if one person accepts it, they start to demonstrate possibilities that other people don't think are possible. So all of a sudden it's proven they are possible. So that's off the table, so that's cool. That there are people in the world that are demonstrating, oh, you can have mental health in the face of mental distress. Oh, you can recover from this. Oh, you can be in a business, be very busy and have well-being. So that idea that this is possible is not possible, things that the principles point to as normal and existing potentials, they're already in the world. So that one's kind of off the table. But the second one, which is the one that we are liable to fall prey to, is the one where we think we understand, but we're very pleased with what we understand, and we're very adamant about what we understand, and we're very uncompromising about what we understand. And unbeknownst to us, we've lost that openness, that humility, that feeling of kind of love and understanding, and in a way, that feeling of right-mindedness, of that sensitivity, of that kind of spiritual feeling of right-mindedness and connection. And instead of the ripples of what we felt as a real understanding, it just becomes a hollow shell of itself. Now, to me, that's the challenge, the more pressing challenge that we currently face. And so that's why I wanted to bang on about it for 40 minutes. So that's what I wanted to talk about. I hope it's been interesting. We still have time. I'm more than happy to wax lyrical about anything that you want to ask about, connected or unconnected. I see Nicola has her hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi, Erin. Hi. That was so what I needed to hear. So you just explained something to me that's happened over the last week, which was amazing. So I hadn't realised, but I I think I had been walking around in a kind of, yeah, I got this. Like, I understand this. I teach this all the time, every day. I know what I'm doing. Mm. And I had a conversation with Dick and Bettinger last week. And the result of that conversation, I just felt like he completely undid me, right, by the end of it. And left me in this beautiful feeling, knowing that's it.
Yeah.
And that my work has just been so different since that day. But the feeling I had, part of the feeling I had was, I know nothing. I thought I knew this, and I know nothing. And all I've got is the feeling, and I don't even know what to teach about the principles anymore. And the intellectual bit had gone, and I had been thinking, part of me, because I was in this lovely feeling, I wasn't really that fussed about it, but part of me was thinking, what's up with that? Like, I really do feel like I'm back to ground zero again, and I don't know anything about the principles, and I did, and you described why.
Yeah.
And so, thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. That's so cool.
That's okay. Like, that's a step in the right direction, not the wrong direction, kind of thing. You know? That's what I wanted to share.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's really cool, and the principles are head turning as a description of reality, even once you accept them. So I had a very similar experience. I was in the middle of, we used to teach these executive institutes, and we'd have a team of 5 or 6 people. And on the end of the first day, we're having dinner, and Kathy Casey's talking about, well, Sid pulled me aside. He says, you don't understand. You don't understand. And I was like, yeah, no, I know, Sid. And I'm sitting there, and for some reason, it dawned on me, oh my God, but that means I don't understand. But I saw it, like, I don't understand. And like, it was like, absolute, no, that it was true. Like, you don't understand. And it absolutely, just like you said, it pulled the rug completely out from under me. And I had nothing. And it's really interesting because it points to the reality of the principles. It points to the reality of mind, because I had nothing, but I had everything I needed. But I didn't know that, but it was still true. So I went into this free fall. Like, I wouldn't say it was a lovely feeling. It wasn't a bad feeling, but it was like total free fall. It was the opposite of conceptual clarity. It was like, there's no walls, I got nothing. But I thought, you know what? Whatever's true, I'll land. I'll see something. But the next day I had to teach the principles to the group. But it was so funny because in my thought world, it was like, you don't understand the principles. How are you going to teach the principles to the group? But in my reality world, in the feeling of understanding, it was like, well, you just see what you got when you need it, You just see what makes sense when you need it, You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. That's a feeling for understanding. And it shocked the hell out of me that I could literally know nothing, get up, teach a whole session on the principles, it work out great, and still know nothing. Because it's real, you don't need to know nothing. It's like, if I go back to my car, I don't need to keep my car in my head. I can just go out and drive it when I need to drive it. It's still there. And it's realizing that it's like, in your head is not real. What is real is already there. You can feel it as you go. It's there as you go. You don't need to see it for it. And your experience is such a beautiful example of that, where it's like, wow, I spoke, it was rich, but I still don't know anymore. And it just points to how irrelevant that conceptual level is. Like, me too, I'm way too interested in that.
But the interesting thing, Erin, just a last little point on that, is as you're speaking, I realised what I have actually done in the last week is take that feeling and try and conceptualize it and share that with my clients. When I haven't done that, I've been impactful, but actually I've fallen for it. I've taken that into an idea about, this is what the principles is, and try to teach the concept of that. I get it.
But that's beautiful too, because what I've learned over the years is you're not going to use your understanding to stop that. You're going to have a deeper understanding by appreciating that is going on all the time. Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. Oh, I'm doing it. Oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. And it's so cool, because that's what it is to have a reality that gets replicated in a thought reality. And the mistake is thinking the thought reality is real, which we do, because like we invest in the concept. So why would you invest in something that's completely unreal? But we do. We totally do. And that's the illusory nature of thought. And there are feeling indicators that we're doing it. And I, for one, breeze right by them. I breeze right by them. But there's something real there that you get used to, not having to hold on to the sides. That's such a good example. It's such a good example. Great. So you're thinking what I'm thinking. Any other thoughts, observations? Yeah, Karen. Hello. Oh, you just muted. There you go.
Hi, Erin.
Hi.
So it's a great conversation. It's and points to what it is that I'm wanting to do. I'm curious as to how I can bring this conversation and introduce the three principles into my work environment and to the team that reports to me, and not do it from a conceptual perspective.
Oh.
Yeah. So how do you do that, Erin?
Well, here's how you do it, Karen. Is you start off as a student, right? You become a student of what you need to understand to do what you want to do. Now you know what you're a student of, the principles in action, and you know the way you want to be a student is not try to figure it out and conceptualize it. You want to appreciate something that's already true, so you get curious. You say, all right, I'm going to be a student of the way my team's lack of understanding of the principles is causing them problems that they care about. Right? So the way I think about it is, if people don't understand the principles, they don't see the operation of their own mind, they don't see the impact of their own state of mind, they don't know that there are other options, and there'll be ways in which they hate the symptoms of that. It's connected to their performance, it's connected to their performance review, it's making them less effective, it's making them less making them have more unpleasant time. And because you're around them and you have an understanding, you can be curious about that. And the clearer that gets to you, right? So let's say you have team members that are always complaining about the same thing, and you're like, well, shoot, if they saw that was just in their head and they understood thought, they wouldn't have that problem, right? And the key is, as soon as you see it, as soon as you have an understanding of that, not conceptually, like you make it up, you kind of invent it, but you see, oh my God, they're totally tripping over the invisible nature of thought, or they're totally overlooking the potential of mind, or whatever it is. And we can talk in more detail about that. But as soon as you see it, you go from, oh, how am I going to talk about this, to like, I can't not talk about it. It's the only thing that's freaking happening here. You see? So when people, like, when I started doing this work, I started as a counselor, and individuals and couples that come for counseling want to know how you can help them. And in businesses, they want you to leave them alone. Right? And the way that I jumped that gap was, I had to become a student of the role that people's minds were playing in what happened to them, and the significance that they would get from that becoming more visible and understandable. And I spent several months kind of looking at business issues and seeing the invisible part that state of mind and the principles were playing. And as soon as I started to see it, I went from, I don't know how to help you people, to, oh my God, look, you got to listen to me because, you know, you're tripping over your own shoelaces here and there's no need for that. Does that make sense, Karen?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. One example of this I had, because I when I first started, the business people I work with had this conception that there's state of mind related stuff and then there's just pure business stuff. Right? And because I didn't understand business, I thought, well, okay, I wouldn't know. You're probably right. You know what you're doing. So I was doing this training for a management team, and they were like, Erin, could we take a break at 3 because we have some real business stuff to talk about? It's just business stuff. We don't need your input. We don't really want you involved. You can listen, but just sit it out for a little while. We'll be done by 4. I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. So they start having this conversation, and it gets more and more complex. And as it gets more complex, it gets more adversarial. And as it gets more adversarial, it gets more fractious. And it just drags on and on and on. And if you could reverse time, it would have ended on a more productive note than it started. So they literally backtracked in terms of progress throughout this meeting. So I feel, well, I don't really understand business stuff. Maybe that's good. I don't know. So I'm sitting at dinner with the leader, and he's all like, oh my God, I don't know what happened in that meeting. And I was like, oh, so that didn't go well, because I thought so too. It went really terrible, but I thought maybe it was a business thing that I didn't understand. So I said to him, well, what did you want to have happen there? And he says, well, I wanted to, and he tells me, and I'm like, but you didn't have the clarity of mind or the listening or the communication for that. Like, how did you expect to achieve that? And then at that moment, I thought, I realized there's always a state of mind dimension. And if you don't have it in hand, it will pull the rug out from under you consistently. And if you have it in hand, you're golden. And it was the last time that when somebody said, oh, there's no thought part to this, that I ever took it seriously. And if I didn't see it, I'd look for it. And when I looked for it, I'm like, So I became a student, and I'm like, that's not happening to me again. You know, just because he can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And just because I can't see it doesn't mean I won't see it if I'm kind of interested. And then the more curious and the more of a student that you are, the more you start to see the telltale signs. You know, you can see a loose end and you're like, there you are. Do you feel like you can take it from there?
I do. Thank you. Thank you. Very helpful.
No, pleasure. Yeah. Well, we have time for one more question, or maybe more than one. Did you have your hand up, Robert?
Yeah. This has been so helpful because I realized that I've been kind of in a no man's land, and my fear of the no man's land, of course, has lowered my thinking and lowered my mood. And it's sort of like I haven't been able to get my way out of the paper bag kind of thing. And one of the things that happened for me is I actually had the insight that if I can believe it, it's not true. Because it's about truth. Let's assume the belief is pointing toward truth.
Yeah.
There are beliefs that obviously point away from truth, but even assuming I have a belief that's pointing me toward the truth, it's not the truth itself because it's about the truth.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that came up for me as a result of that was I didn't understand the difference between understanding based on content and understanding as a state.
Yeah.
And what I noticed was whenever I would see a belief as a belief, I would start to lose that sense of certainty and that sense of surety, and it would be more diffused. And I didn't understanding as a state And so I felt like I was doing something wrong. It's like, okay, this is a belief. It's not true, but I don't know I don't know what to do with that now.
Yeah.
So this whole discussion of the difference in the feeling state of intellectual understanding versus insight understanding, that I'm gonna have to play with that, because
Yeah.
until I experienced the difference, I didn't know that there was a difference. I didn't know that this feeling is still limited, and there's another feeling that can even transcend that. And that feeling, even though it doesn't include the certainty that comes with intellectual understanding, that's a good thing.
Yeah. I know. Well, I had the same thing, that I had to get comfortable with the fact that you don't know what you don't know. You don't know it all at once, but in a more understanding state, things make sense, or you have a sense of the sense that things make, and that kind of was kind of good enough. Now, the thing that occurs to me listening to you, Robert, I don't know if this is helpful, so I'll let you judge of that. There's a way in which it might be useful to experiment with just being unconcerned with understanding, because in a way, understanding in a feelingful way is a residual category. It's like when all the dust is settled, it's what's left. See? And our inclination, my inclination, sounds like your inclination, is to try and capture what makes sense in a conscious thought.
Right.
Oh, that. Oh, that's that. Oh, that's that. And experimenting with getting less interested in that doesn't mean you don't have that thought. It's like not putting your stock in that and saying, all right, well, let's put a stock in that. Well, let's just see what makes sense in a more sensitive way, in a more neutral way, that kind of comes out of the blue, as opposed to something I can kind of hang something on.
Yeah.
It's a different sensation, and it's like, in a way, if mind is the intelligence of all things, and if we are that, and if we already know this, then we get more in touch with that. The less distracted we are, the less preoccupied we are, the less the less we're convinced we are by the idea that we don't know, right? I'll give you a really, really, really silly example of this, right? I had this client that was sent to me. He was from a religious community. He had just gotten engaged, and he was like absolutely super anxious that he'd made the wrong decision. And because his family had accepted the engagement, he was due to be married, and he didn't know what to do. And he was like, sometimes when people are so anxious and thinking so hard, they look like they're sweating. Mm-hmm. This guy. So for 3 days, I'm trying to talk to him about different clarities of mind and thought and blah, blah, blah. And he's like not having it. He's just totally, well, what shall I do? What shall I do? And he's not changing. His feeling state is not changing. So at the end of the third day, I only had 4 days of him. I give up. I said, look, I mean, do you think you've made a mistake? He said, well, I don't know. That's why I came to see you. I said, I know, but outside of it all, like rock bottom level, do you think you've made the wrong decision? He's like, well, I've been thinking about that for weeks. I'm like, I know, but like, if you weren't thinking about it, underneath all that, do you think you made the decision? And this was so interesting to me. And I didn't think he could do this because he'd been kind of crazy for the last 3 days. He just goes, no, I don't. And it was so interesting, because outside of all the thought, he was in a completely different sense. And he was like, no, I don't think I made the wrong decision. I actually think I made the right decision. I did this and I did that, and I feel good about it. And it's like that recognition that when all the thinking's said and done, there's nothing left but understanding. There's nothing between you and what makes sense and what's true and what's obvious. And it's shocking to me how invisible that becomes when I start getting into my thing. I mean, I was actually seeing that today. It's like, I don't feel like I got any understanding. And then other times I feel like, well, how could you not understand it in that feelingful way? It's absolute nuts how much that changes. But that really is, you're looking towards mind, which is like, oh, you are it already, you know it already, but you're not always in a state where you see that. It's good to know when you are and when you're not, because you kind of let yourself kind of drift. You're willing to let yourself drift, like Nicola talked about. Oh, I'm not going to have it together, I'm just going to drift. And that's a different sensation to let go of wanting to have your head around something. So, I don't need to have my head around it. That was big for me. For me, I want to have my head around it. I have faith I can get my head around it. You know, I'm very committed. I'll stick with it. But it's like, well, what if that's not useful and is pretty much impossible? And then it's like, oh, okay, so what if there is nothing to understanding? What if it's just knowing when you're headed in that direction, knowing what it feels like, respecting what you see when you're there, and being willing to disrespect what things look like and what you want to do and what it feels like when you're not.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure. It's lovely to talk to you all like this. Is there anything else on people's minds? No? Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Yeah.
I can relate to all of this so well. Oh my gosh, because I caught myself this morning reading some books, not SIDS, but just trying to intellectualize it and say it so I can say it more soundly, whatever. And yet it's like we forget it's already in us. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to just, like you said, I love that, to just let it settle and bubble up.
Yeah. Yeah. And to know, you know what's clearer and truer when you feel it.
Yeah.
When you're in a state in which you feel that you can see it for what it is. And then in a state when you know you can't see it for what it is, you know? Yeah, it's very cool. That's really cool.
So this was perfect. Thank you.
Oh, good. That's really good to hear. I love what you're saying, where you're at, because we're all up against the same, you know, we're all in the same kaleidoscope, you know, so it's nice to share and get oriented. That's awesome. I'm really very grateful that you guys were here and to be able to talk this through. It's really nice. Really nice.
Thank you so much, Erin.
It's a real pleasure. It's a real pleasure. And if any of you are coming to the conference in London the week after next, I'll look forward to seeing you there. Yeah, great. We'll say hello. It'll be really nice to see you.
And just to let everyone know, the next 3PGC webinar is on May 9th with Carolyn Frenette. So I hope to see you live then. Okay. Thanks so much, Erin.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you all. Thanks for coming.